By video request, today's topic is on the different forms of government. When I look at all the different types of government out there, I think this video would take 15 days. So I'm going to just focus on the ones that were specifically listed in the comment. I think I could really simplify this video and summarize my argument into 2 points here, so I will do that. My first point would be that there's no right type of government. It depends entirely on the morality and intellect of the population, as well as the morality and intellect of the people ruling the population. And even over time, the right type of government for a given population will likely change. My second point would be that while the system itself definitely matters, I would say that the morality and intellect of the people in charge of the system matters much more. If you have a great police system, but then all your cops are a bunch of corrupt assholes, it doesn't really matter how good the system is. On the contrary, if you had moral, wise, and intelligent people running ISIS, it would actually probably be a pretty good regime. In Canada, the Liberal government has probably one of the most sexist, stupid, and immoral policies imaginable. Recently, during the Syrian refugee crisis, they decided that they're only going to take in women and children and men if they're in a family or if they're gay. I would want a liberal government, but I wouldn't want this liberal government because they're illiberal liberals. In fact, I would say they're as far from liberals as you can possibly get. I'm pretty confident my stuffed bird is more qualified for running Canada than the current government, and this is simply because he has no stupid thoughts. In fact, he has no thoughts at all, which is better than stupidity. Now, this is a little chart I drew up here, and it's obviously incomplete and would need more dimensions, but as some, reasonable general rule, I think it's not bad. So, when you have people who are utterly immoral and utterly stupid, and you have a government who is very smart and kind, you want something as close to a dictatorship, like a totalitarian dictatorship. On the contrary, when we have a totally immoral and stupid government with very smart and moral people, we want something as close to an anarchy as we can possibly get. Now, when we have a situation with a good government and good people, we want something where power is very well balanced out between the people and the government, and maybe this is something like democratic socialism minus the majority rule aspect. Now, when you have a totally immoral government and immoral people, no system's going to work very well. But I think the best system here would be a theocracy, and this is where people are drawing authority from some external source, because both the people and the government suck. Just remember, stupid and immoral people can't be reasoned with, and imaginary authorities are about as close as you can get to making these people behave better. So the first specific type of government requested was nationalist and nationalist socialist. Now, I'm not too sure what they're looking for here, because everything I find about National Socialism is related to the Nazis. In fact, the definition it says right here is the political doctrine of the Nazi Party. So let's explore the concepts of nationalism, socialism, and the Nazi Party, and hopefully we can come up with some kind of understanding here. Now, according to Google, the definition of nationalism is placing the needs of your nation above the needs of other nations. And a liberal will say this is the worst thing ever, and a conservative will say that this is the best thing ever. And I would say the truth is somewhere in the middle. When we place the needs of our nation substantially higher than the needs of other nations to the point we treat other nations with sociopathy, well then war is 100% inevitable. If we simply just go into other countries, steal their resources, and enslave their people, that's obviously not going to work out. On the contrary, when we try to help other nations, we do a much worse job at it than helping our own nations, because we understand the needs of our own nations better than we understand the needs of other nations. So, for example, the US was sending the Syrian rebels all these weapons to overthrow the government, and all those weapons ended up in the hands of ISIS, and it's been a total disaster. Debatably good intentions, disastrous results. Now, looking specifically at the Nazis, I would say that they are nationalist, socialist, and I would add act-based utilitarians into that definition, because that's an important point in the way they reason. And I think actions like the Holocaust, these are all a result of act-based utilitarianism. Using act-based utilitarianism, I can literally justify the death of anybody, and this is a problem because people are selfish, and anyone they don't like, they will simply just justify the death of them. So for example, let's say I don't like Gandhi. Well, there's no question Gandhi wasn't a bad person. Definitely not a bad guy, and he definitely had at least some good intentions, right? So, I could simply say Gandhi encourages pacifism, and if we were all pacifists, then people like Hitler would take us over. So by killing people like Gandhi, we're saving the world from being taken over by tyrannical oppressors. That is perfectly sound reasoning, and I think if you apply this logic to the Nazi philosophy, you can see why they do most of their actions. Now, one of the reasons I don't invest too much time studying history, and this is especially for older history, is because all the facts are debatable, and the conclusions which you extrapolate from the facts are even more debatable. When you talk to different historians, they can argue pretty much anything from Genghis Khan was the greatest person in the world to the worst person in the world. Based on the information I have about Hitler, I would say he was a terrible person, he was a sociopath, a racist asshole, and very illogical. But my education on Hitler primarily comes from Western schools, and as I've shown in my other video, there is a very heavy amount of propaganda and indoctrination within Western schools. The next type of government on the list is theocracies, and the concept of a theocracy is rule by God or some kind of divine authority. Obviously not by God, it's all going to be by people who represent God or by some kind of scriptural reading, unless someone really has found God. Now, one of the good things I think about a theocracy is the fact that most people are stupid, and when using their intellectual facilities and being reasonable and logical, they will come to very dumb conclusions. So in some sense, I think it's better that most people follow an intellectually designed cult than it is for them to actually think for themselves. Another good thing about a theocracy is if you have doctrines which are reasonably moral and intelligent, it's very hard to warp these laws. So while you can split some hairs within a theocracy, it's pretty hard to get away from the fundamental message. I don't think any Christian on earth doesn't believe in the resurrection of Jesus, and if they don't, I don't think anyone would recognize them as a Christian. When we look at secular law, it's subject to drastic change at any given moment. It can be challenged by all kinds of people, and some of those types of people can be very stupid and immoral, and this can switch secular law to something very violent and cruel in a heartbeat. The major problems with a theocracy is, of course, it's an enemy of reason. Anybody who's reasonable, moral, and intelligent, their opinions cannot influence the doctrines of the theocracy. And as a general rule, theocracies tend to usually suck because the religions that become more prevalent usually aren't the ones with good value. Hence, the two biggest religions in the world are Christianity and Islam, and throughout history, they've been very good at pushing their religions onto other people through the use of violence. Next on the list is national anarchism, and I'm not sure if this is just a combination of anarchism plus nationalism, but from what I'm reading, it seems to be all about division. So basically the concept is, if you have a government controlling 1 million people, their ability to respect the consent of all these people is a lot harder than if you have 10 governments controlling 100,000 people, right? And if you keep dividing this up further, eventually you end up with one person controlling one person, and this is the ultimate respective autonomy. Anarchy is the truest form of social equality and the most left-wing ideology there is. But I think one of the problems is simply the fact that people aren't equal. And I think if you have good moral people leading you, then it's good that they're leading. I don't have an objection to that. I think the prime reason why someone wouldn't want someone else making decisions for them is because they're oppressive in nature. If someone genuinely cares for you and is smarter than you, would you want them making decisions for you? Hell yeah. And I think one of the big problems with anarchy is the people who represent it. The first major demographic of people who represent anarchy are basically just total assholes. They want anarchy simply so they can rape and kill as many people as they want and have no repercussion. And the second group of people that represent it, I think, are kind of these delusional, naturalist, green, new age people. And they have a very unrealistic perspective on reality. They tend to think that if you were to remove government, you would just go to a totally peaceful state where everyone's holding hands, getting along, and no one's bossing each other around. But this isn't true. Quite simply, there is people who are assholes, and as soon as there's no law, immediately they're going to become tyrannical oppressors, and eventually those people will just become the government. I think anarchy can be very well achieved within a small community of people who know each other very well. So for example, within a certain friend circle, it's quite possible to allow your friends to use all your property, to do whatever they want, and quite simply they will just treat the other friends with respect and dignity. I would say that nationalistic anarchism is again an oxymoron. If you want true social equality, then you shouldn't treat somebody inferior just because they're from another nation. So I think that anarchism is a better ideology than national anarchism because national anarchism naturally leads to self-contradiction. Next on the list is Marxism, and Marxism is the attempt to move towards a classless society. That's the fundamental premise. If you have a society where 30% of the people are brilliant intellectuals and very sweet, kind people, and then the other 70% are a bunch of tyrannical assholes, well, you would want those 30% to have all the power. You'd want them controlling the money, you'd want them to be in charge of all the law and making all the decisions. Marxism, though, is more a focus on eradicating oppressive classes, and I think that's obviously a good idea. If the only reason why a class has power is simply because they're assholes and control all the guns, then they certainly don't deserve power. Now, of course, there's a big difference between Leninism and Stalinism as opposed to Marxism. And this is what happens when politicians try to carry out a good ideology. From what I know about Karl Marx, which I don't know a whole lot about, and correct me if I'm wrong, he was all about individuality, he hated conformity, he was all about the, rainbow hippie, love, treating everyone with respect sort of idea. I think Karl Marx's vision is a lot closer to something like Denmark than it is to Soviet Russia. Last on the list is aristocracy, and this is the idea that power should be held by nobility and heredity, and this is obviously, I think, a terrible idea. If you look at intelligence, there's no strong correlation between heredity and intelligence. Not only is it a bad idea for that reason, but typically the bloodline that's put in power is based on a completely arbitrary source. So what would I say is generally the best government? Well, if we were to go through this gigantic list here, I think we could eliminate a whole bunch of them using science. So for example, in aristocracy, we could eliminate because the idea that morality is caused by bloodlines, well, we know that's just factually untrue. And we know that intelligence is the result of bloodlines is also a statement that is factually untrue. I would say the best type of system is a polymorphic system, one that can adapt and change with time. And I would say the system that is most probable to put moral and intelligent people in power is by far the best system. And I would say that 99% of systems out there don't do this and aren't even designed to do this. It took me 5 minutes to come up with my best system here, and I think this is the system of scientifically eliminated leadership. This is where we use science to eliminate who can be a potential candidate for leadership, and you eventually end up with 50 or 60 people, and this becomes your government. So within the process of scientific elimination, you would do things similar to getting politicians to make a whole bunch of predictions about the world in 4 years. Get them to predict the economy, get them to predict foreign policy, get them to predict revolutions, things like this. And those who get a large percentage of predictions wrong get eliminated, at least from making foreign policy or something like that. Then say you would have ethical screenings to ensure the politicians are ethical. And probably the most objective and easiest way to do this is you could ask them what are their core beliefs, and then get people to look for examples of them contradicting themselves. Then you would have things like money screenings, which would ensure politicians are paid minimum wage so that money-hungry people have no interest in politics. The list goes on, and I think that the best way to come up with a good algorithm for appointing moral and intelligent people is through the scientific process of experimentation. Simply try this on many groups of people and see which algorithms are successfully continually producing moral and intelligent leaders, and see which algorithms are failing. The fact that in 2015, voting still produces a liberal government as hypocritically sexist as the Canadian government is a sure testament to the failure of democracy. But it doesn't matter if democracies fail, because within school curriculums, we're taught that democracy is good. So if you haven't already watched my video on government indoctrination in the curriculum, I highly recommend watching that. I go through the entire Swedish and Canadian curriculum and show you all the democratic indoctrination within it. This also creates the fundamental problem in that schools represent intellectualism when schools themselves are anti-intellectual agents. Now, schools could very easily become intellectual agents with the right leadership, but as of now, they're actually stagnating intellectual progress. If you like this video, share it, subscribe, check out my other videos, and if you have a video request of your own, leave it in the comments below. I do every video request ever. This was a video request, and my next 2 videos are also going to be video requests. I also reply to every comment ever, unless I don't see it. Sometimes Google messes up for that, so if you want to discuss anything in the video, fire away in the comments below.